Welcome back to Life's Chillin'. My name is Avital, and this week's Parshat is Parshat Lech Lecha. And Parshat Lech Lecha is pretty famous for the way that the Parsha opens. The Parsha opens with God speaking to Abraham. And God says to Abraham, "Go for yourself and from your land, from your relatives and from your father's house to the land that I will show you." So you may have heard that line before. Again, that is kind of like the most central, famous part of Parshat Lech Lecha. God's command to Abraham that he should leave everything he knows behind and go to this land that God's going to lead him to. And that often gets a lot of the attention when it comes to speaking about the Parsha, understandably, because it's a huge and beautiful lesson. But I want to talk about something that happens after that in the Parsha, in Parshat Lech Lecha. Essentially, Abraham heeds God's command, and he takes his wife, and he takes Lot, his nephew, and he takes the his disciples, the people who were following in Abraham's teachings, and all of the sort of wealth that he had amassed, and he goes to the land of Canaan. And then there comes to be a famine. And because of the famine, Abraham and Sarah and Lot and all of their possessions and all the disciples pick up and they go to the land of Egypt. And in Egypt, an entire incident happens, and in essence, the king asks them to leave. But he sends them along with wealth. And so Abraham and Sarah and Lot and the disciples and the possessions, again, everybody picks up again and starts to travel. And it's here where I want to focus on something interesting that happened. So the Torah tells us, "And Lot, who went with Abraham, had flocks, cattle, and tents. And the land could not support them dwelling together. And there was quarreling between the herdsmen of Abraham's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock." So in essence, they were not living together well. There was quarreling between the people who were taking care of Lot's animals and the people who were taking care of Abraham's animals. They were just not dwelling together well. There was not enough space for both of them. And so Abraham comes to Lot, and Abraham said to Lot, "Please let there be no strife between me and you, and between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are kinsmen. Is not all the land before you? Please separate from me. And if you will go left, then I will go right. And if you will go right, then I will go left." So essentially, Abraham comes to Lot and he says, "I don't want there to be ill blood between us. I want there to be, there's a concept in Judaism, shalom bayit, peace in the home. But peace between family, peace between brothers. Lot is Abraham's nephew. Abraham is saying, you're my nephew. I don't want there to be any of this arguing between you and I, between you, the people who work for you and the people who work for me. I don't want any of that. So I think the best thing to do is for us to go separate ways. Out of love, out of familial connection, out of the desire not for there to be conflict that's irreparable. Saying, right now when we have this and it's at a low level, let's separate." And so the Torah continues. It says, "So Lot chose for himself the whole plain of the Jordan, and Lot journeyed from the east. Thus they parted, one from his brother." So I'm going to come back to that lesson, but essentially the Torah continues that Lot was now dwelling in Sodom. And some of the major kingdoms, there was a bit of a sort of uprising, and a bunch of the major kingdoms went to war against one another. And in the process, all of the wealth of Sodom and all of the possessions of the land, including Lot and his numerous possessions, were taken captive. Sort of, they were captured, so Lot was now a captive. And a man sort of came and told Abraham that Lot, his nephew, had been taken captive. And here's what the Torah tells us about how that interaction went. So again, this man came and told Abraham, and Abraham, he armed his disciples who were born in his house, 318, and pursued them as far as Dan, and with his servants deployed against them at night, and they struck them. And then the Torah continues, he, Abraham, brought back all the possessions. He also brought back his kinsmen, Lot with his possessions, as well as the women and the people. So it's interesting because this is the story that follows immediately after they part ways. The stories of the fights with all of these kings that Abraham hears about Lot being captured, and he brings together his disciples and he goes after and fights on behalf of Lot until he's able to reclaim Lot, his kinsman, again his family member, and all of the women and the possessions. So what I thought was very interesting about this, and was such a beautiful lesson for our lives, is that Abraham had sort of this wisdom. Abraham was saying, there's going to be conflict if we stay together. I'm reading all the signs. That's just what's going to happen. It's going to blow up in a way that neither one of us wants. And so they did the prudent thing and they separated. They didn't stay together. And I think only because of that separation, now when Lot is in trouble and Abraham hears about it, is Abraham able to say, oh my gosh, that's my family, that's my friend, I'm going to go help Lot. I'm going to go help Lot and his people. And I think that if Abraham hadn't sent away Lot at some point, then they would have had this conflict and it would have blown up. And maybe they would have gone to war against each other rather than Abraham being able to go and help Lot out in this dire circumstance that Lot was in. And so too in our lives, we have these relationships. We have these relationships in which there's some sort of conflict that we understand is going to manifest into something larger if we don't do something about it now. It's kind of like the think before you speak, or the take a breath before you're angry, or the we'll talk about it tomorrow type of idea, because it's kind of inevitable that if things build and if you don't take that time to separate and that time for yourselves, then it's going to escalate into something much larger than if you separate. So again, I think what we can learn from Abraham is that sometimes in our relationships, when there's conflict, when there are things brewing under the surface, it's important to remember that shalom bayit, that peace in the home, and that sometimes in order to achieve peace in the home, it does mean a separation. It doesn't have to be a permanent separation. Like here, Abraham and Lot now have reunited, but the separation was necessary in order to give them both the room to breathe and to come back together as a greater unit than they were to begin with. So I hope that we can all remember that beautiful lesson, and I wish you all a wonderful week and a Shabbat Shalom, and I look forward to speaking with you next time.